Good afternoon, I'm Vahe Gasparyan, Council Member of the National Democratic Axis of Armenia, and today's guest is Mr. Gokor Yernukyan, who lives and works in New York and who is a brother of Mr. Karo Yernukyan. Mr. Gokor Yernukyan is an active supporter of the National Democratic Axis. Thank you for being with us, and please tell a little bit about yourself and what are you doing in New York? What's your profession and what's your...
Thank you for having me and affording me the opportunity to speak to our English listening audience, which rarely gets to hear what's going on in our homeland, firstly. As far as what I do in New York, since we had moved out of the Soviet Union in 1971, I had been involved in my family business, which we continue to do so. At the current stage, it's real estate management. It's a business, of course, mind, soul, and everything else is in Armenia.
Yeah, and how large is the diaspora in New York, Armenian diaspora? How many people?
From my recent understanding, it's about 100,000, which is considered the metropolitan area, because as you may know, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut is considered one metropolitan area. And of course, like everywhere else, there's the, as they say, Dasagan Spurk, the old generation immigrants, and the new wave, which was post-Soviet immigration.
And you have the contacts with the diaspora in Washington, in Los Angeles, in other states of U.S.?
I don't have many contacts, but of course, having lived there for 5 decades, I do have some.
But those contacts are personal. I mean, no kind of organization, coordination of the Army.
Not organizational. Unfortunately, most of the organizations in the diaspora, whether intentionally or unintentionally, I can't speak directly, are not specifically interested with the nation building of Armenia. For the most part, and it has been, and the diaspora has been used as a cash cow, as an ATM machine for the genocide recognition, and that's where the diaspora and Armenian relation ends quite often. And as I said, I believe in some organizations it's done intentionally, some unintentionally, because the ties have been severed for so long.
Yeah, that's a main problem and main topic I would like to discuss today, because as we usually like to say, although we gained our independence since 1991, but in fact Armenia has become more and more colonized and controlled and ruled by Putin's Russia and by Kremlin itself. So the policy was to keep Armenia under this control and keep diaspora out of global participation in intra-political and nation-building life of Armenia, just source of some cash and humanitarian support, nothing more. And the organizations that are coordinating the diaspora, like աջակցել or Haydat, they are mainly focused on Artsakh, so-called self-determination or genocide recognition, Haydat, but not nation building and real sovereignty and decolonization of Armenia. Whether this is the first and most important things, unless we have, we can't solve the Artsakh problem or genocide or Haydat problem unless we have real sovereign and independent state. So our axis, National Democratic Axis, is now trying to send this message to diaspora that the most important contribution to Armenian population and state is to help us in nation building policy. Are you doing, are your efforts in this way also? there?
Yes, absolutely. I think the problem in the diaspora is twofold. One, they do not, the diaspora, especially again the classical diaspora, does not have the concept of what it means to be nation building, because they left, well, their grandparents or great-grandparents left the Ottoman Empire under the worst of circumstances, whether it was after the Hamidian massacres or the Great Genocide. So they left an empire that was in shambles, and they came to a very stable United States. So there was no idea of nation building. There was an idea of complete destruction and complete organization. There was nothing in the middle. The other part of the problem is the diaspora often, unfortunately, looks from above Armenian sovereignty. I have friends over there who are, maybe first, second generation, even immigrant who came young as I did. And when I speak to them about the importance of sovereignty, when I say, when we had the issue with Sevlich, when we lost part of it, and I say, can you imagine if the United States lost even a smidgen of land from Vermont to Canada, and we all just sat back and said, well, it snows there 8 months out of the year anyway, so who cares? And my friend's reaction is, instead of saying, oh, that's an interesting example, he says, that's not the same as all. I said, how is that not the same? If we're talking about our sovereign land, it's our sovereign land. And you can't go past that unless you start that with a premise. Yesterday, I had an opportunity to listen to Arapapyan, and he brought up a very interesting example. Canada, which has 10 million square kilometers, if I'm not mistaken, is in a dispute, an ongoing dispute with Denmark over one small island off the coast of Greenland that's 1.5 square kilometers. There's nothing but ice, there's no inhabitants there, but they're a dispute. A nation that has 10 million square kilometers is in dispute over 1.5 square kilometers. That's how important land is, let alone Armenia, which doesn't have a fraction of that. So we have to understand that the sovereignty, the land, every rock, every stone, every stream is our sovereign land and can't be given up. They made it so that even Vochmi Tizagana, with not granting even a smidgen of land, has become a curse word instead of something that we should be proud of.
Yeah, I think the real problem is not even the losing some kind of territories, but the real problem is that Ankara, Baku, and Moscow are now pressuring Pashinyan and his government to make him sign the recognition of the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and even Turkey. Erdogan, in his last interview, said that Turkey is ready to improve its relations with Armenia in case Armenia will recognize Turkey's territorial integrity. That's the point, because if Armenian government will do so, then we will make the results of this war legitimate and the results of Moscow agreement legitimate, because even Moscow agreement was signed between
two illegitimate,
but they weren't able to make Armenia sign that time, and they are eager to do this now. So this is the problem, and we Armenians all over the world have to do our best to fight this and not to let them do so. Does our diaspora realize the problem? And
I don't believe so for the most part, and I think not because they don't want to realize it or they're standing against it. I think one of the problem is just pure lack of information, or even worse, misinformation. The information that has been instilled in the Soviet Armenian mentality for years, where is not that far from what happens in diaspora. Even the ones that have gained every benefit from having lived in the US, still believes that without Russia, we're doomed. And to change that mindset is an ongoing effort. Again, it falls into two categories. Some of it is pure naivete. Some of it is probably because since the 50s and 60s, the KGB had installed their agents through Bulgarian Armenians, Lebanese Armenians, even Soviet Armenians that had emigrated to the US. And each one of them, from the shoemaker to the lawyer, had done its job of saying Armenia is weak, Armenia needs Russia, even if Russia is horrible, we have to stand by them. And that's a difficult thing to overcome. That's why I think once we understand the importance of our sovereignty, not to say that, well, if we lose this, it's okay, or it's worth losing this because we'll ultimately have peace. If we realize that these are just fantasies, they can't be realized. No, Turkey nor Russia will be satisfied with 1/3 of Sevelich or just Chernugh or just Meri, Michansk. They will want everything. No one is satisfied with one piece. They will come after more. And if the people realize this, that there's no such thing as attaining peace and sovereignty by giving up, rather the only way we can have our peace and sovereignty, as Monte Melkonian had said, is through our victory.
Yeah, I think we are now in the most, or at least one of the most important periods of our many thousands history, because if we will look at the history of Russian presence in Caucasus, and that started in 18th, 19th century, since Russian Tsars and his army entered Caucasus, and they had a victory over the Persian army and occupied eastern Armenia, etc. I think during these 200 and 300 years of time, objectively, if you analyze the history, we could do nothing to escape this Russian occupation, because Western countries either were weak enough or not interested to enter this region, and that's the explanation of Moscow Agreement in 1921. The United States, although they signed Woodrow Wilson Arbitrary Award, but they did nothing to follow up, and yeah. But now, unlike this huge period, now the Western countries, United States first of all, and France and Iran also, and India, they are mostly interested in the real sovereignty of Armenia and Georgia, because they are starting to build the mega project, they called, and they introduced this project during the G7 summit a few months ago, and this project is called Build Back Better for the World, and we call the South and North project, which has to connect Persian Gulf and Indian Pacific Ocean region with Europe through Iran, Armenia, and Georgian territory. So there are real interests of Western countries in this region in Armenia, and the only thing lacking so far is the Armenian resilience and will to fight on the streets for their real sovereignty. And I think this is the critical point. Once we have our people fighting and showing their will and decisiveness to struggle for their real sovereignty, the very next day we will see the help of United States. And National Democratic Axis is fighting or striving for getting the major non-NATO ally of the United States the status that is granting to many countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, Israel, India, and others. so I think the most important is to explain this to diaspora that now is the time to get the real sovereignty because the geopolitical changes are
in our favor.
In our favor, yeah.
Finally,
you agree?
I absolutely agree, and it's because I happen to live in the U.S. for many years. People think that I'm what they call a flag-waving American. I know very well the U.S.'s shortcomings, that they're not idyllic angels and they're not doing it because of our beautiful blue eyes. But fortunately, as you had said, because of the geopolitical situation, their interests happen to be in line with ours, whereas Russia's interests are completely 180 degrees against ours. So the choice is quite simple. It's not 179 degrees, 177 degrees. It's 180 degrees and 0 degrees. So our choice is simple. As far as being on the ground and the streets, of course, I can sit here and go channel and tell people to hit the streets, and it may have zero value. But what people need to realize that any progressive, anything that has progressed in history has happened on the streets. Forgetting about Armenians, the women's right to vote. Women in Washington, D.C. and London 100 years ago were getting beaten up in the streets to have the right to vote. I tell that to many women, they can't even imagine that 100 years ago, not 1,000 years ago, 100 years ago in nations like the United Kingdom and the U.S., women were getting beat up in the streets to vote. Children were being used 12, 16-hour labor as labor in coal mines and other unpleasant circumstances. And it was only when people went into the streets that no corporation, no government in the history of mankind has ever done anything out of the kindness of their own goodwill. It's only when they were pressured. And that pressure has always been on the streets.
On the streets, yeah. And continuing this, I would like to say that when Ara Papian visited twice United States in March, April this year, and he met with many influential people, John Herbst or Daniel Fried, Adam Schiff, and others from State Department and the Atlantic Council. And John Herbst and the others used to say, show yourself on the ground. If you want us to help you, show yourself on the ground. How can we see that you want a real sovereignty if you're sitting at home and putting your likes and comments in Facebook? That's not you should
That's
do.
not the ground.
That's not on the ground. So this is the message we are trying now to send our people, because I understand demoralized and disappointed people after the war, after terrible losses, but we should get out of this.
We must get out of this.
Depressed, yes. This is the only way to save the state, to save the future of our generations. And what can diaspora do to help us with this? I mean, the part of the diaspora that knows about that and that realizes the problem. What can do this part of diaspora to help Armenian people here on the ground?
Well, I think there's three types of support. There's moral support, there's physical support, and there's financial support. Moral support probably is the easiest. Giving a simple phone call or like or
pushing the relatives,
and that's moral support, and that always helps. We always get energized by that. The physical support is obviously getting off their rear ends and coming here even for a week, 10 days and 2 weeks and being active. And then of course if they're unable to do that, then it's the financial support, because the National Democratic Axis is much stronger than people can imagine. But to maintain that strength, like anything else in the modern world, you need resources. And resources, whether we like it or not, in plain English, it comes down to dollars. And that is what the people have to realize, that everything from this interview to the different demonstrations that the National Democratic Axis has organized, whether the recent ones in front of the French consulate or the US consulate, resources are required. And by resources, I need money. So moral support, financial support, and if possible, physical support.
Yeah, very nice. And I think we are now getting closer and closer to the last and the most decisive fight, which will be, as my prediction tells me, which will be in the September, October. Those are the months that we are expecting to be tough because of the few reasons. I mean, the first is that the interpolitical situation in Russia is very, very unstable because of many reasons: economical crisis, healthcare crisis, political crisis. And they have September 17 to 19, they have State Duma elections, parliamentary elections. And most of the politologists and journalists and bloggers predict turbulent political situation in Moscow. The other reason is that we are now seeing that after this adoption of 5 years government program, Pashinyan is now full of energy and will to sign the agreement with Azerbaijan, with Turkey, when recognizing their territorial integrity. And I hope this will be the last factor that will push the people to go on the street. So these 2 months will be quite decisive, and diaspora help will make us more stronger and help us a lot. You said about moral support. I think every single call made by the diaspora member to his relatives and explaining all the situation is very important, because diaspora was very inspired because in 2018 after this Velvet Revolution, etc. But gradually they started to realize that nothing changed in fact, and the same policy is continued, controlled by Russia. The most important was Kremlin was doing during this 30 years is keep diaspora out of the participation in the interpolitical life. They made many limitations for diaspora, getting the citizenship, Armenian passport, the right to elect and to be elected in
from afar.
Yeah. So we are now saying that if we will change the government and National Democratic Axis will come to power, we will, as one of the first steps, we will change this. We will, we will change these limitations, and we will give every right to our diaspora to elect, to be elected, to become an Armenian citizens automatically, and to be part of the Armenian interpolitical life, just like for Jewish people participating in Israel's life. And that's the diaspora should understand and should realize that coming to power of NDA is in their interests also. Am I right?
Absolutely. Besides the example of Israel, we also have to remember during our first and only republic in 1918, we did make use of our diaspora, even though it was much smaller. And that was post-genocide, post-war, when our forefathers had the wherewithal to bring in people like Tamanyan to start nation building.
Yes.
So if we could do it in 1918 under horrible circumstances, there's no reason when we can't do it now, when we have a much richer, and I don't mean financially richer, just by platitude, of resources that we can take from, everything from the medical to the legal to the engineering field. and we're not making use of this. And yes, I have to believe that part of it is intentional. As far as going back to the people supporting, yes, they have to start looking at Armenia as not this fairy tale land of our forefathers where we sang and had avandakan voroshbaner, but it's an actual home. There are many Armenians that love Armenia, that cry when they land and they see Masis and the mountains and the rivers, but they still, I think it remains this fairy tale. Just like a child likes a fairy tale book, that's how we love Armenia, as opposed to loving it as our own. And the reason I see that is when I do speak to friends and relatives back home, especially after the 44 days, quite often I hear something like, Arten hoknetsi, I'm tired of it, el chem karoghanum, so on and so on. And I had a close cousin of mine, I gave the example, I said, if your child is sick, I said, you do everything. You try medicine, you get witch doctors, you travel to Europe, you would travel to Mars if you could. But you don't give up on the child. You don't say, this kid is sick again. Enough is enough. You fight until the very end to save that child. And that's one child. Of course, it's your child, but it's one child. How can you get sick of trying to save Armenian statehood? There's no such thing. It's a continuous struggle. So once we, and I don't mean to sound too idealistic, but once we can understand that concept of there's no such thing as getting tired or it being too difficult, or well, we tried this and it didn't work. It's a continuous effort to get out of this miserable situation and start with real statehood building. So we can have the Armenia that many Armenians want to compare to countries like whether it's Switzerland or Singapore or Israel. I believe that if we have a proper leadership and proper statehood, within 5 years we will be at least equal to Singapore and Switzerland, if not better.
No doubt. Yeah, you told about Singapore, and I was fortunate to do my clinical fellowship in the National University Hospital of Singapore. So I lived there for a year. I know that country from inside, as we say usually. And I remember the mentor of Singapore, former Prime Minister of Singapore, Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, visited Armenia back in 2009, I think. And when meeting with government members and with people, he used to say, use your potential of a network nation. You have diaspora all over the world, in Europe, in America, and one of the journalists told in Russia, said, forget about diaspora in Russia. Use the potential of your diaspora in the United States. But to use the potential of diaspora, we need a real sovereignty. That's the message we need to explain. When we say that Soviet Union fall apart in 1991, and all Soviet republics became independent, that's not true. That's partially true, because the real sovereignty was granted only to Baltic states. All other Soviet republics, former Soviet republics, stayed under the Russian control, and this EATM or APH, I don't know this abbreviation in English. So these are reincarnation.
Eurasian Customs Union.
Eurasian Customs Union, or so on. So these are the reincarnation of Soviet Union or Russian Empire, and they did their best to prevent Armenia from growing and developing. But Armenia was one of the Soviet republics that had a great potential, because 3.9 million of population in 1989-90, and many enterprises and manufacturers, scientific institutes, etc. in Armenia was the very good start point for developing. But this was not used and was just ruined due to criminal policy of the local government, local presidents or prime ministers, which in fact all these four leaders of post-Soviet Armenia were henchmen and puppets of Kremlin, and they served not to national interests of Armenia but to interests of Kremlin. And now is the time, and historical chance for us to get rid of this vicious cycle and to become a real sovereign and within just a few days become a sovereign country and get the real allies who think about your interest, not about itself only, like Russia is doing, but real allies like United States, France, Greece, Iran, India, the countries that are interested in Armenian sovereignty because of their own interests. And that's the message that we have to explain to diaspora every single day. And the final question is, do you see that diaspora is starting to realize all this due to our National Democratic Axis work and
yes,
agitation or something?
Yes, little by little.
Positive moment,
as they say, katil. The only problem with that is, I think, we're in such a dire and time-sensitive situation right now that we don't have time to those drops have to become hurricanes very quickly to really part the mountains. So everything that we're doing just has to be sped up, and we can only, I don't like to use the word hope, but we can only imagine that the people will wake up out of the slumber and realize what it means to not have a homeland at all. Because from the moment that Pashinyan starts signing away until the moment that there is no Armenia is a much shorter period than most of us can imagine. Probably one generation, probably 20 years. And it may seem like a far-fetched notion, but again, historically similar things have happened. But on the other hand, to stop that abruptly and send Pashinyan and his cronies on his way and say this land does belong to somebody and it belongs to us, the people, is the strongest message that we can send.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that the other message that we have to explain to diaspora is that don't listen to these illusions that Azerbaijanis and Turkeys and Russians tell Armenians that you need just to sign this agreement and the peace and stability will come into the region. In fact, they are putting the very soft pillow on our head, because after that they will gradually start to how to say, true away Armenian state, because Aliyev is saying that Sevan Lake, Gerarkunik, Sunik, all those lands are Azerbaijani lands.
Maybe even.
Yerevan even, yeah.
And unfortunately, I'm sorry to cut you up, until it reaches the steps of Kaskad, many Armenians won't realize. Someone had said something interesting. He said, I wonder if during the genocide, if the people in Van were saying, those fights are in Erzurum, it'll never come to us, or vice versa. I'm not picking on one. And until it came to their door, it wasn't apparent what was going on. And as far as the Turk or the Azeri, which is the same thing, saying that, with this little piece you'll get peace. I apologize to the viewers, but for the sake of a good example, when they came into our doors and they stole our wives and sisters and daughters, if there were 4 or 5 young women in the house, they didn't say, we'll just rape one, the other 4 will be okay. They raped every single one, and then often killed every single one. So there is no such thing as one little piece will give us peace, because if that was the case, one of your sisters will be enough. And if you're even willing to concede one of your sisters, then it's on you.
Yeah, if Turks speak about peace, it means that they are preparing the war. So we need to realize that, and I usually every Saturday I make my monologue, my program addressed to our people, and last one was quite emotional and passionate. It was a tough talk with the people, because I think we need to wake up, we need to shake ourselves, and come out of this sleepy and I don't know, passive situation, and because no one wants to stand by the losers, and the big countries, powerful countries will help only those who wants that. The last example with Afghanistan shows that America does not want to help anymore any people who is not ready to fight for himself.
They tried for 20 years.
For 20 years, they invested milliards, billions of dollars in
trillions,
trillions in Afghanistan with no results, because Afghanistan people themselves wasn't willing. So are we the same? That's the question.
No, we're better. Unfortunately, because of century and millennia of what Armenian people have gone through, I think part of it is because we've gotten tough skin. So when they say "Danaga voskorin hasnel," it's the path to our bone is a little bit longer than the average person. But when it does hit the bone, the Armenian core, the Armenian root is very strong. It just needs to be woken. As far as the Turk or the Azeri talking about peace, the Turk talking about peace is like a lion talking about being a vegetarian. It's impossible. And we need to realize it. And we're hoping that our skin, it's good that our skin is thick, but at the same time, it prevents us from getting that jolt and waking up. But with these events coming, as you said, in the next 2 months, we're hoping that will all be expedited and it will happen quicker.
And you will do your best in New York, helping us with this
as much as I can.
Time. Thank you very much for being with us today. And next time you'll be in Armenia, we'll be more than pleasant to invite you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Բաժանորդագրվեք Ազգային-Ժողովրդավարական Բևեռի YouTube-յան ալիքին։